question. Do you
Hmm.
think the teachers have any right, like, unless of course it's like a high school sex ed class, blah, blah.
Hmm.
Do you think that teachers have any right at all to talk to your kids about sex?
Um, that's tough.
Mm,
That's tough. So one of my best friends is an early age educator. So they work with first grade students.
mhm.
And they are actually pro teacher sex education.
Okay.
Um, and they sit there because of where I sit about this, which is there is age appropriate sex education to be done, right? So
Sure.
that person isn't educating or advocating for kindergarten teachers to be telling kids about anatomy, right? Like they're
Mhm.
not advocating for that kind of thing, but that, if that there needs to be a certain amount of presence, a certain amount of understanding among our public education teachers about how much is appropriate to talk about because first grade, 6 year olds are of the position where they begin to notice things that are different, right?
Okay.
And this is something we're going to talk about a lot. Things that are different. Kids notice. People notice. It's an inherent part of how we survived. It's lizard brain. Lizard brain just notices that shit is different. And so a kid is going to approach you and go, you know, so and so in this class has two daddies instead of a mommy and a daddy. Why?
Mhm.
And whether you want to look at it as a sex question or not, it's a sex question,
Okay. I can
you
see
know?
that. I can see that. Yeah.
So
I
there
can see
has
that.
to be a certain
Definitely.
amount of, and that's like in an individual understanding, right? But there's a
Sure.
lot of legislation in place, and particularly the legislation in Florida that's been passed that doesn't allow for teachers in his position to be able to explain something like that. And maybe that's not the intent to inhibit a specific interaction between just teacher and child, but it's also an inhibition between like using a storybook that exhibits two mothers instead of a mother and father.
Okay.
So, like, does that storybook have something good to offer? Absolutely. The point of that
Sure.
story is not that they have two mommies, but now you can't read it because they happen to have two mommies in the story.
All
And it's
right.
like, okay, well, there's a certain amount of sex education here. Like, we have to accept it that what we want to call sex education and what actually involves sex education is so much larger. Just like we talk about linguistics, we want to talk about there's 5,000 different languages on the planet. Yeah, but language education starts with making eye contact and cooing in turn. Like, that's a part of your language education, and a part of your sex education is being able to approach people and ask questions
Yeah.
and being able to interact with the world as it sits and still allow for tolerance and understanding. So I do think that there is a place for a certain amount of freedom within our public classrooms for
Okay.
those kind of different sexuality expressions. I have a teacher, a middle school teacher, who was actually strictly forbidden. We would reach chapter 7, which was about sex, right?
Mhm.
And it was that really mechanical, like there's a penis and there's a vagina and these two things, and then there's sperm and then there's a uterus and then like it's all that technical bullshit.
Right.
And then we would read that chapter, and then the rest of the class, we'd work on our questions at the end of the book or whatever, and she would tell us, "Look, I have this shoebox. I've cut a hole in it. If you have a question, whether you think it's dumb or stupid or useful, doesn't matter. Write a question on a piece of paper, put it on the box. And tomorrow, when we come back for class, all we'll talk about, the whole class, will just be questions that's in the box."
Okay. That's a
She got
healthy
fired for
idea.
this. She got
Wow.
fired for that because
Well,
in the state of Idaho, you're not allowed to talk about sex outside of the context of the mechanics of it.
okay.
So she provided a type of sex education the state of Idaho has determined isn't healthy for our kids. And I'm telling you, I remember so vividly, one of the questions was, can a plastic bag be used in place of a condom?
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm
So,
sorry, but
yeah.
this is the type of sex education. I was in 7th grade,
Yeah.
so 15 years old. This is the type of sex education that our kids need to stay safe.
I
There reaches a
and on that
point
one there,
where
yeah, I would definitely
safety
agree.
becomes more important than morality.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would definitely agree with that one. Well, my question, one point I was going to make was, okay. Well, let's say, um, let's go back to the mommy and mommy, or
I'm going to
daddy and
stir
daddy.
my cup somewhere where you can't hear me
Oh
stirring
no,
it.
I can definitely hear it. And one of these days, you won't do that to me. But it's fine. It's fine. No, you're not. Anyway, let's go back to the book that has the mommy, mommy, and daddy, daddy.
Hmm.
My question or my response was going to be, because I know a lot of people, whether or not they have kids right now, or a lot of parents, their response would be, okay, cool. Well, if my kid has a question about that, tell me that my kid has that question and let me talk to my child about that. Versus, why do you have to talk to my kid about that? Because then you also,
Yeah.
depending on what side of the line of the fence a teacher's on, then other
Hmm.
shit gets involved, and then that's a whole other wormhole that we're not gonna go into
Hmm.
today. um but there's that. But definitely, like, on something like that, like, can I use a grocery bag? That is, honest to God, a good fucking question to ask somebody. I mean, now that I'm older, I know, but like,
With a really
around.
distinct yes no answer,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, don't do
right?
that. Yeah, that's gonna be a
Yeah,
no, my guy. Don't do that.
certainly fall on one side on this one. And
Yeah,
that's just
and
factual, scientific,
yeah,
actual
that is
response.
just, yeah. Like, so for that to been a, granted, I don't know what the other questions were, and also, once again, if the laws state that a teacher cannot talk about sex outside of the basic mechanics, then it is what it is. But it does suck that a space that was safe, because
Hmm.
I'm assuming no one's names was used. It's a
Nope.
random ass box. You can throw whatever your
Mhm.
questions is, so it sort of keeps the anonymity um, intact. Um, it's unfortunate that that was a situation where that sort of happened, because this was a teacher that seemed like they were just trying to educate, not to influence, but to
Right.
educate,
They
and that's
valued
unfortunate.
their students' safety over their perception of morality.
Mm,
They found it more important that their kids were safe than that they were moral or sinning or whatever it is. And that's not an arrangement. I mean, there are plenty of people who feel that, well, if you don't even bring it into it, then all you have is morality. That's all that's left. And therefore you did the wrong thing because it was never about safety. It was about morality from the first place,
that's
which
fair.
carry your arguments, right? That's I'm not gonna it's entirely valid. I don't feel like it's very realistic, but I do feel like it is a valid argument. You know, if we
Yeah,
focus on our kids' morality, then all we have to worry about is morality. So if that's where Idaho has decided to stand, that's where
yeah.
Idaho stands. But very much so. And that's why there's no good, clean answers on this kind of stuff because I know my friend who's a teacher if they were approached about something like that, would choose to send an email to the parents. It's just like,
Yeah,
hey,
hey, your kid said
your
this.
child asked today about this thing, and this is what I said in response. And
Yeah,
then you get the response that you get. I
yeah.
mean, but this person is also not straight, and they have had students removed from their class because they're not straight.
Now,
So, I mean, they.
which then is a topic that I want to hit, and I don't know if we needed to do a whole episode on this, but I think we can briefly brush it a little bit. Um, Another question that I had when I brought up the idea of, like, is it okay for teachers to talk about sex? Is also part two.
Mhm.
Is it your students' business to know about your sex or romantic life?